So, thank you, Sigurd, for receiving us today in your studio here in Berlin. I'm very happy that we have the chance to have this conversation after we have published several projects from you. And I want to start this conversation by asking you, how did you shape your career?
It's interesting to think about how you shape your career with an office like this one. Because in a way, you can of course dream about certain things you want to build and do as an architect, and then of course it's always limited to what projects do you get, what project comes to you, what competitions do you win or whatever. So there's always this interesting dialogue between what you're really dreaming about and then what you're able to do, and then of course making the right choices. It's kind of like an actor has to look very much into which roles do you take, because that will shape, that will bring you to the next role, and so on. And I think as an architect, you have to make the similar kind of considerations. If we do this project, what will be the next? If we do too many of a certain type of projects, will that be what we do and what we stand for? So there's a lot of these kind of considerations, definitely. But otherwise, of course, to be honest, I graduated in 2008, which was the year of the big financial crisis. I feel like I'm a part of a generation of architects who is very capable of managing through one crisis after the other in different ways, and then a pandemic, and then lack of materials in Europe because of a war, and so on. And somehow we survive and we work with it, and we find our new ways through it. But I think it shaped my career very much, as opposed to offices that started 10 years earlier, in the early 2000s. So I do see a little bit of a sort of generation shift there. But it definitely shaped offices in my generation.
And how would you describe the profile of the office today?
The office at the moment is occupied with building different houses in landscapes around different countries in Europe, and hotels and landscape hotels. And we are building public schools here in Germany. So we have 3 directions at the moment that we are working on, and have sort of several projects within that direction, which is all, I think, projects that I'm extremely excited to do. I think it's all projects where there's still something for the architect. That means it's still to a very high degree creative work. It's our job to bring new ideas to the table, and then ideas that have a kind of shape and form that is buildable. And I think that's a perfect balance. We very, very much work with conceptual things, and there has to be a strong idea behind everything we do, and it still has to be buildable, and it still has to be affordable, matching whatever budget is available in every project. And I very much try to make sure that that's what the office is about. To be honest, I think being an architect can actually be very boring if you don't watch out. and we put a lot of care into that. Even sometimes we help shaping the brief a little bit, so it becomes more interesting. You can start a project in a way that what is given to you doesn't necessarily have the potential of becoming super exciting, and then you kind of help reshaping the brief a little bit, and then suddenly there's a little bit more of a fun factor in the project. And I think that's extremely important, especially, for example, with the hotel projects we have. I feel like designing a hotel will never be boring, because every year we want to build something new. We want to create a new experience. And designing and building a hotel is building an experience. So you have guests who arrive, they see something, they wake up in the morning and see something, they sort of stage their days, kind of like in a movie where you have one scene after the other. And every year every hotel that you build has to create a new experience that has never been experienced before, and staging the surrounding landscape or the local gastronomy or the local culture in a new way. And that's extremely interesting, and that's the kind of projects that I think this office is very much about, because then we have to create an experience, and we have to, it's our job to throw a lot of ideas on the table of how that could look like. So it's not just execution, it's also idea development.
And these 3 typologies that you mentioned, educational, residential, hospitality, they are very connected to our life. Early life, daily life, let's say, especially life. How do you think that the concept of how we live is evolving? Because these are typologies that have been with us hundreds, well, of course, centuries, But today's way of living, society, families are really changing.
Yeah, I mean, within the 15 years that we've been building houses in this office, I think I've seen a bit of a difference in, of course, the diversity that comes into housing. I think there's sort of an expectation from the real estate market that we still live in families of mom, dad, and 2 kids, but family structures look so different, and you know, statistically, a lot of people also divorce, and then they need a different kind of house. They start working more home. I mean, we saw during the pandemic an immediate reaction towards home offices. Like all houses we have planned since that period has some degree of considerations about working there. Even so, with the hotels we design. So there's, you know, something happens in the world, and immediately we rethink how we live. And I think that's quite interesting. I mean, then it's our job to create a new type of space that wasn't necessarily on the list of spaces before, and that informs very much how we approach then designing dwellings.
For example, your house in the island of Quintos, this is an interesting experiment, I would say.
Yeah, we built a house on the island Kythnos in Greece, which is actually my own summer house also. So it was the first time I tried to be client and architect, which is, I don't know how many times in your life you do that, but that's why it has a bit of a degree of experiment as well. I mean, it's built on a Cycladic island, and they have a building code that we had to respect. They also had a certain type of vernacular architecture that I definitely also wanted to respect and was super interested in. But apart from that, it's an experiment in kind of hosting also, because the house is clearly built for a family where you have guests, and where it's not like a mom and dad and children and so on, but more like a lot of friends having a holiday together. That means all the bedrooms are equally nice. Everyone wakes up to the same nice view. I didn't like the idea of inviting people over to a house to have a holiday, and then there would be a wonderful master bedroom for me, and then there would be I don't know, some terrible room looking towards the cliff for the guest and so on. There needs to be like a sort of a non-hierarchy house. That also means that, you know, in whichever room you sleep in, it's the same nice experience. And I don't have a preferred room as such. I move around in the house too. So it almost has the idea that, you know, from certain open office spaces where nobody has a steady work spot, but moves around according to what project you're in and so on. That's kind of translated, but more to the idea that everyone should have the same good experience. So it's very much a place for having guests and for hosting and for gathering people.
And also the sense of flexibility is something that I see in the lake house. When you look at the plan, you will also think this is not just for living or an extension of a house. It's also designed to host a variety of uses that maybe you're not even seeing today.
Yeah, that's the interesting part of the lake house, and it's also interesting that you asked that way, because it looks domestic when you see pictures of it, and when you see the floor plan, it looks like a large villa in a way, and we also designed it to look like that, but it is actually a seminar center. It's not built for somebody to live in. It's a space for sport and movement, as you would translate it from German. So you can rent it and make events and sports and exhibitions or yoga retreats and similar things. But what we wanted to achieve was to make a building that doesn't appear like a conference center with the atmosphere of an airport lobby. So we avoided to have spaces that are out of proportions for what you need them to do. On the contrary, we deliberately made some of the rooms too small, like the kitchen, for example, like the famous kitchen party theory that the best party is in the kitchen because that room is too small, and then it feels more intense. So we designed as a kind of a side space to the big hall where you can gather a lot of people, that has 8.50 meters to the ceiling. So it is a grand space. But as a niche to that, there's a kitchen that has a completely domestic scale and similar to the room, so you can sleep in some of the smaller meeting facilities in the building. That it gives you the feeling that you are in somebody's very nice home at a lake. But it's taken down in scale, and also the volume of the whole thing. Instead of making a big block with 2 floors, which would have been the biggest volume at that lake, we broke it down into smaller pieces, so the scale of the building seen from the lakeside matches the houses that it's surrounded by, and it disappears more between the trees, so to speak, but also from the inside it gives you that feeling of being in a land house rather than a seminar center. So I'm not surprised you ask into it as if it was a house, but it is actually not.
So in a way we could say that you are bringing important aspects of what could be the daily life into buildings that have other uses. In a way, what happens in hospitality, but also I understand that it's also present in your school projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the school projects we do in the western part of Germany is a reaction to a new school reform they have made there, which is leaning up against the Scandinavian school model, which means more project work, more group work. The kids are presenting in front of each other. They do homework at school as well. So that means our task is to have a school building an area, including exterior spaces, where you can find both rooms for individual work, small groups, bigger rooms, groups, and then big gatherings, and then the normal sort of frontal teaching with one teacher speaking to 30 kids at once. So suddenly it's a variety of spaces we need to design. So the old school layout with long hallways and classrooms to the left and right, it doesn't work anymore because it's not how teaching is happening today. And then again, when we then start talking about smaller rooms and smaller spaces, we suddenly get into a domestic scale. So the first school we completed, we built a village inside. So we took over this big building that was done in a fairly regular way, and then we sort of superimposed a village on top of that, containing little playful looking cute houses. So suddenly there would be little piazzas and streets and small rooms that the kids could go into and find a lower sound level than in the big rooms. So we divided into a big variation of rooms, and we divided into a big variation of sound level, from loud to quiet. And that again makes it a little bit more tolerable to be there for so many hours a day. And then we did other fun factors on top of it, which is of course also something we do to make it also fun for us in a different scale, but also fun for the kids. We made some workshops. We had to make an art room in one of the schools, and then we made a workshop with the children where we made the floor dirty. So we called it a Jackson Pollock action and painted on the floor. And the idea behind that was that when you imagine children moving into a brand new school building and everything is pure and white and clean, and then they don't really trust themselves to do like dirty creative work in the art room. So we wanted to overcome that first stain where you're too careful or too respectful to something new. So the school, when it was new, the art room should already be dirty from the beginning.
Interesting, because in a way you describe the building, its interiors, as a canvas for life, in which for sure that the materials must play an important role. We are here in your office that is a library of materials, several types of bricks, stone, wood, that are very present in your work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's also very hands-on what we do. Like I said in the beginning, it's we put a lot of effort into making sure that being an architect and our role as the architect in this big collaboration that all the projects is, that our role is to be the ones who throw an idea on the table, get it permitted, and then carry it all the way through a 2 to 5 year long process. So we hold on to our concept and our idea through all that. But at the same time, it's extremely hands-on what we do. So we're sitting here with all our materials that we can touch and see and play with, and the way the materials are produced and where they come from and so on informs also how we use them. So, and we use them also in our communication with the clients to convince them that we should go in a certain direction with a project. So it's very important and very nice to be surrounded by these things in the everyday life.
And for example, in the Mitzelberger farm, that is a place that invites people to change their context, to really get connected with nature, and the hotel provides an experience related to the local food, to the local resources. How is this reflected on the materials?
Well, the choice of materials in the Mitzelberger farm actually plays a very big role. So we had a very interesting beginning of that project actually. The clients, Tom and Nadine Mitzelberger, it's the third project we do with them. So it's a client that we know well. We've worked with them for over 10 years now. So we were invited on board very early in a kind of phase 0, where we had to visit the place and see what could we do here, because what they already had at that time, they had bought the farm, which is about an hour south of Berlin, and they were starting up a new kind of next level sustainable agricultural concept called regenerative agriculture, where they would produce food for the hotel that they already had here in Berlin. And that type of agriculture is very beautiful. It's very lush. It's a jungle where a lot of different crops are mixed up and growing together, and one plant creates shadow for the next plant, which then keeps the insects away from the third plant. So it's a biotope, but visually beautiful and interesting. And it's interesting to learn about. And for everyone who is interested in knowing where food comes from, or could come from also in the future, when there will be more of this type of farming, it's very interesting. So we definitely agreed that it was worth thinking of turning that into an experience for guests. And then the question is, in which format and so on. And then there was an old ruin on the plot, which we could take away. It was basically already fallen together. So we took it away. We saved some materials that we could use for some furniture later, and then we made space for a new building. And what we then found out in that sort of phase zero with the owners of the hotel was that it should be a place where you could learn about how the food is produced and maybe help making the food, and then also enjoying the meal, and then spend the night so you could drink some wine and not go back to Berlin. So basically it should be this sort of total experience of gastronomy from crop to table. And therefore the material palette came from two different sides. There's a local vernacular architecture in the area of the forest of Spreewald, where they build brick houses with saddle roofs. So the whole village looks like that in a way, and all the neighboring villages as well. At the same time, we got interested in the idea of making building materials, or choosing building materials that were dealt with like food. So we choose burned and baked and oiled materials, for example. So bricks and wood that were treated in certain ways became an interesting part of the storytelling. So you are in this sort of total experience of gastronomy in a way, and also things that are handmade. You can say that the size of a brick is dimensioned after the hand of a human being. So it is one brick after the other put on top of each other. And in many ways, food is the same. It's very handmade. It's hand-on. The scale of the food we eat is adapted to our body and so on. So we completely connected production of food with production of buildings in a way, and nerded a bit out on that. But it's very fun, and it wasn't very difficult to make that bridge between the vernacular architecture and our gastronomy idea. It actually was a good match already.
Yeah, well, and in a way you can sense it through the images. But there is also, I feel that there is another material that is important across your work, that is light. Something that is very expressive in the roof house, in the glass house, also in the lake house.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm from Denmark, and I studied architecture in Denmark, and I grew up with all that Danish design and Scandinavian design. And I think after towards the end of my studies, I probably also had Danish design up to here. And as I think you do when you're just surrounded by so much pride of something, at some point you're also thinking like, okay, there must be more to the world than this. And then I moved to Berlin, and I think what I definitely kept, and what I still understand as something extremely valuable in Scandinavian design, is the work with daylight. Because you have this weird climate situation that half of the year is too dark and half of the year is too bright. So the whole house becomes, in a way, a filter for the daylight, to control it and to manage it, to make sure there's enough at the right time, but also that you can protect yourself from too much of it. So it's if you see the house as an envelope around your body in a way, then the purpose of that is, apart from keeping the rain and the wind out, also to filter the daylight. And that's when it becomes really interesting. So we have designed a lot of houses where the whole movement of the sun plays a role, like in the glass house, for example, which we built north of Berlin. In the morning, there's a certain terrace which we built with protected from the wind for the morning sun. And then later in the day, there's a covered terrace towards south. Then there's a room upstairs where the whole roof is made out of glass. That means in the autumn and in the spring, you can sit up there. On a fully sunny day in August, it will be too warm, but then you can sit on the covered terrace underneath. In the winter, it's not a heated room. It's basically like a winter garden. In the winter, there's a house below it, so to speak, which is heated, and then you don't sit up there. But there will be 8 months of the year, or even in the winter day, as soon as the sun is out, suddenly that room is activated. So according to temperature and sun, there will be different areas of the entire plot, basically, which will be interesting, or the right place to be at that time. So every day you can kind of feel a little bit, how's the weather today, and then you choose your spot in the house. And at the same time, there's also that migration of the sun starting in the morning on a certain terrace and then moving around the corner. And then you maybe eat your dinner at sunset, looking in a specific direction from a table or something like this. So we do a lot of these kind of ideas, which is, I think, as a kid, I remember I saw a TV program with HandsOn where they visited him in his summer house in Mallorca, Canlis, and he talked about that every day at 6 o'clock he drinks a glass of wine in front of a certain window, and then there's a ray of light coming in through a window. And I think that made such an impression of me, this idea that you make daily rituals in a house and you're just waiting for that really good moment where the sun is in a certain position and something beautiful happens. And that's when you do a specific thing every day, or at least in the days where the sun is out. That somehow informed, a lot of our houses. In the house in Greece, we made a double wall where the kitchen is towards the west, which is at the same time a way to avoid that people from a road behind the house can look into the house, but we still wanted light from that direction. So the light bounces between two walls in from the west and bounces the light down on the kitchen surface. And that means around 5 o'clock, when you should start thinking about cooking, the whole kitchen table is illuminated with daylight. And then you think, okay, right now this is the nicest place in the house. Here's the light. This is where I want to be. And then you want to start cooking. Not that I have a problem with cooking, but I think it's a beautiful thing to do when you have a day off, to sort of think about what you want to cook, plan the meal, buy the groceries, and then at the right time when the daylight is in the kitchen, you want to start cooking there. So you mix it all up with the architecture and the ritual.
And to close, what can you share from your experience on starting, running, and growing an architectural practice?
That's a good idea. And I mean, I really like to talk to colleagues about how they have approached it. People who have started an office either earlier than me or later than me or at the same time. It's extremely interesting to look into the very different ways that people have done it. I think our unique way with this office was to grow with the scale. So when I started the office in 2010, alone in a city, in a country where I could hardly speak the language, it was of course a weird situation. So the first thing I did was to build furniture, because I wanted to have a homepage that didn't just have renders. I wanted to have something real, and I could not afford to build a house and sell it, but I could afford to make some furniture and take pictures of them and so on. So we started with furniture basically, only because there was nobody on the phone, nobody called, nobody knew we existed, so we had to do something. And those were also the years where blogs was kind of a thing. I mean, social media existed, but blogs was a new thing. So everyone in Berlin at the time had a blog. So a lot of people at my own age at that time, they were sort of scanning places like Kreuzberg, where we are now, for new, funny, creative people and so on. And I think they were the first people to pick up what I was doing. And journalists were looking into what the blogs were publishing, and then the journalists sort of discovered it that way. So we made some furniture in the beginning that ended up being quite good published, and that sort of qualified us, I think, to be trusted to do some interior work for Michelberg Hotel. Was one of our first clients actually, quite early out. And then we built our first houses in Denmark, so at some point we were also trusted to build the roof, so to speak, and then those first projects became, and those were single-family houses in the area around Copenhagen. We did some sustainable low-cost houses near Copenhagen, which was a bit of a controversy because building sustainable is typically also more expensive. But it was a place where our clients were like young people who could, had a budget of this and that much. But it was in a local plan that had a sort of a high level of sustainability to give the building permission. So yeah, we had to figure out how to deal with that paradox, and then we found ways to get things prefabricated and made out of elements and so on, and then they got built, and they were, I think, also quite sort of decisive of the next projects that came to us. So it was a mix of that, but I think the unique way that this project was built up was growing with the scale. And I mean, now we've been going on for over 12 years, and still we are a team of 14 people. So I think people who, for example, put all the effort into winning a big competition, they will have probably had a sort of a flat rate, and then suddenly they exploded into a different level. Our office has been sort of plateaued slowly up, so I also had time, for example, on a personal level, I had time to grow a little bit with the assignment of running a company. I mean, I have a creative education, like everyone who works here. We all have the same education, but then suddenly I had to be
the Geschäftsführer, as it's called in German. I had to run the office, and other people are employed and have to do other things. So, we all come from the same place, but we all ended up in different roles. And I think we all have to grow with our roles and learn it and figure it out. So, yeah, with the slower growth, I think that became a bit easier to grow into a different role, and also to grow into the scale of things we do. So the budgets we are juggling with now are, radically higher than the budgets we were juggling with in the beginning, but then we also learned how to sort of deal with those things.
But in this growth, you still find the time to actively participate in the projects, to draw floor plans still?
I draw floor plans still. I really do. Of course, it's a big part of my work also too. There's a lot of communication in my work. And I have to also go to construction sites sometimes with the project manager so we can make some decisions together there. But one thing that I really, really value is to help in the beginning to start up a project. And I feel like in the floor plan, almost all decisions are made. So you can influence a project a lot by still participating in forming the floor plan and maybe a few simple sections. And that's how a lot of that's how a lot of projects start. It's a ping pong between me and a team here, where we actually all draw and exchange files. I also have this idea that all good ideas are suspended between people. That means I maybe run around with like a 70% finished idea, and then I have to talk to someone about it, and we have to sort of sketch it a little bit together, and the other person will provide the remaining 30%, and then we mold it together. So it happens in conversations and in sketching together. It's rather untypical, I think, that one person in the office would be throwing the whole thing on the table in a complete form as it is. We shape things in the beginning through conversation and testing things in more or less abstract drawings.
Perfect. Well, I wanted to thank you for sharing the experience, the ideas, and also this reading that you have about society that you can take, from what I can see, as opportunities.
Yeah, we try.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming.